From Synerger, this is Polaris. I'm Chris McNulty. Digital workplaces, collaborative environments based on intranet technologies, have the potential to unify the ever-expanding world of apps and content, or to become expensive ways to build news that no one reads. Our guests today, Ed Rogers and Michelle Caldwell, have global experience helping business evolve to support and develop engaged employees with enhanced digital workplaces. This is Polaris. Welcome to Polaris Pathways. I'm your host, Chris McNulty, Head of Strategic Markets at Synerger. Synerger is an advisory agency focused on transforming business for our clients, navigating strategies and leadership culture with ease. We're adding something new this week on Polaris. For the next several episodes, we'll be running a small contest. If you like what you hear, please help us spread the word and leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts. This contest will run from now through May 1st, when we'll select one lucky winner to receive a Synerger prize pack with socks, stickers, and a custom jacket. Staff at Synerger is not eligible for this contest, unfortunately. Today, I'm happy to introduce Ed Rogers and Michelle Caldwell. Ed is the CEO and co-founder of Acumatica, and he has a history working with business leaders transforming the way that they operate. Before Acumatica, Ed was the COO of Ectron, a leader in web content management recognized by Gartner and Forrester. He is a huge hockey fan coming to us from New Hampshire today. Michelle Caldwell is the CEO and founder of Synerger. She's spent over 25 years working in organizational transformation. She's shaped executive steering committees, operating frameworks, and she's known for building trust with clients and being an expert on digital workplaces, working closely with Microsoft's engineering and marketing teams. So I couldn't think of two better people to take us into this world of digital workplaces in 2025. Let's define our terms and our data points. When we talk about digital workplaces, we're really talking about the interconnected set of collaborative and communicative environments. It's a whole nexus, an ecosystem, a hub, a cockpit, choose your word, of applications and tools that are allowed to empower people to plug in and work from anywhere, in any style, on any device. So we're talking about things in the cloud, things like Microsoft Teams, Google Workspaces, portals, more. Forrester is predicting that by this year, customers will be spending over $2 trillion in digital transformation initiatives. It's important to make sure that that money is being spent wisely, and it's not all going into AI. It needs to understand the dynamic nature of work and consumption patterns. A recent study by McKinsey found that over half of employees have the option to work remotely at least part-time, highlighting the permanent shift towards flexible work environments. This term, sometimes is referred to as Omni-Work, reflects the ability of individuals and organizations to empower people to work from anywhere in whatever style makes them most effective. So that's a lot about the background, but today we have the real experts on digital workplace, Ed and Michelle, ready to share their insights. Let's go. So welcome back to Polaris. Today, it is my privilege to be joined by two esteemed colleagues from the world of digital workplace. So we're joined today by Ed Rogers, the CEO of Acumatica, and Michelle Caldwell, the CEO of Synerger. Ed and Michelle, welcome to Polaris.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Ed, this is your first time on the program. Could you take a minute and introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, thanks, Chris. Yes, my name's Ed Rogers. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Acumatica, and we're a digital workplace platform located here in southern New Hampshire.
Fantastic. Michelle, you are a third-timer on the show. We haven't yet gotten to have a five-timers club in honor of SNL's 50th anniversary, but Michelle, could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Hi, Michelle Caldwell, CEO and founder of Synerger Alliance. Been in the digital workplace consulting realm for 25 plus years now. So
great. So let's get into it. Just to start out, for those of the audience who may not know, what exactly is a digital workplace? What do we mean when we say that term?
Well, if you ask Gartner, they'll tell you a digital workplace is not a product, it's a strategy, right? But I often look back and say, well, what are you trying to achieve with a digital workplace? You're trying to create an environment where your employees can work, can perform, be engaged, and drive productivity. And so for us, the digital workplace is a series of strategies.
Okay. So just because you deployed Teams, does that mean that you have a fully realized digital workplace?
I would say not. I would say that could be part of the strategy. What we look at Acumanet is we kind of break it down in 4 or 5 areas. What is your communication strategy? How is the company trying to engage and connect and communicate with their employees, right? We think you need to have an internal branding strategy that really helps drive the internal brand and the culture of the business. We also think you have to have an engagement and productivity strategy for the employee, and then there needs to be strategies of how to support that. How do you drive adoption? So all those strategies help to make up a bigger set of the digital workplace. Once again, the main goal is to have the employee, enjoy their work, enjoy the teams that they're working with, and actually have a positive view of the company. Because those employees that have those 3 things will overperform and will absolutely support their customers in the same manner.
Terrific.
And I would just add some position here that in many environments where I see Teams, it isn't carrying necessarily a heavy brand message and storytelling of the company's brand itself and the culture via that, as Microsoft often calls it, the cockpit of work. So I think, in terms of prior to Teams, a lot of digital workplace experiences, even those powered with Acumanet, there wasn't a platform that could handle the kind of cockpit of work, the messaging easily, the files and all of that. So we used to have to integrate all of that into, let's say, a modern internet or a digital workplace hub. Now, what I love with Teams is there's this kind of parallel connected universe, if you will, where the brand and the messaging and oftentimes the culture and community is happening in the digital workplace, and then connecting that to Teams where people are chatting, doing calls, meetings like this, that kind of that file control, that content control from a file perspective is happening alongside of that digital workplace in Teams. Microsoft's been smart in calling it the cockpit, like sort of a cockpit of work. So I think Teams is a great partner in the digital workplace, but is not the sole destination of where people need to get work done in a corporate environment, a company environment, where they also still need to understand what's going on in the company and feel part of a brand and a culture.
Yeah, certainly one of the things you run into when you see these larger companies is making sure that the employees understand the business strategy and their mission, because ultimately you want everybody on board and pulling that wagon in the same direction, right? And so when you think of it from that perspective, that is about internal branding, and that is about culture. And if you can drive those 2 elements, you can bring those people together and move towards that mission statement.
I wanted to ask you both to think about why this matters now. So digital workplaces, have their roots in going back to things like intranets. Intranets certainly aren't new, but here in 2025, there's a lot more attention being paid to digital workplaces. Why is that happening?
I think there's a couple things we're hearing. We're seeing that marketing communications is taking control of these intranets because they're looking for a central place to market and communicate with their employees. 10 years ago, that's not how intranets were being used. It was a repository for documents and files and for people to go find stuff, right? And so some of the techniques that you've seen in the world of public-facing websites, which is really driven by the marketing, those techniques are now being delivered in the intranet space. One of the co-founders over there at a CMS company, when we first started that company, it was about using a database to drive content to a site. And I remember the IT teams liked it because HR could update job postings. But eventually it became about the digital customer journey with that business and the ability to create a brand identity or brand loyalty with that digital customer. But the employee at the time, they were still being given an old intranet, an old PC, and an Outlook account. So you could see that the digital employee was behind the digital consumer. What you're seeing now, particularly with Marcom taking control of those intranets, which is a very different intranet than it was before, they're now taking those marketing strategies and bringing it to the employee and getting the digital employee up to speed to where the digital consumer is.
It's been said that one of the imperatives is to turn content into conversation. What are some of the best practices that you've heard for companies that are really trying to foster those two-way or multilateral communications?
It's a great question, Chris. I think what I've observed over the years is that many organizations will say if asked, like, do you want to have a two-way conversation with your employees culturally? Do you want better leadership engagement? They'll always, well, not always, often will say yes. I rarely run into a customer that says, oh, no, we don't want that for our people. However, oftentimes the experiences that they provide to their employees aren't enabled to do that, or they're not encouraging that. So things like being able to have transparent feedback mechanisms, having content in a way that a conversation can evolve around it, whether that's via, community and social capabilities, leadership corners, things like that. I often will see and observe like town halls that have no way for people to, in the moment, ask a question. They want to like pre-curate questions and all this stuff and prepare for that. And what I've found is today's workforce is not interested in that. The younger generations now that are in our workforce and growing in great numbers, they grew up on these two-way social conversations in their circles of friends and their colleagues. And so when they come into the workforce in the corporate environment, they're absolutely expecting to have access to leaders, have a conversation, feel heard and embraced culturally. And if you're not enabling that, it's going to be really hard to retain that very bright, brilliant talent in your organization.
I'd love to kind of get your thoughts about, with that communication strategy, like how do you recommend the mix between, with Marcom taking a more prominent role, having Marcom people as content authors relative to having team leads as content authors? What's the mix there?
So on our side, we recognize the fact that there's what we call professional content authors. These are people that are writing content every day. So when you look at internal comms, they're driving the brand by telling stories about the company, about their leadership, about their communities, about their partners and their employees, right? So every day they're writing content. And so for us, we have them in an environment where they have very much an editorial experience. But then you have other leaders out there that are department heads and team leads. How do you want them communicating back to the business as well? And if you use the internet as a central point of communications, you want to give them capability to do that as well. But they're not professional content authors. So their authoring experience has to be more straightforward, has to be casual. So for them, it's just this more like page authoring, where they're talking about the success of their departments. They're highlighting an employee. That's really popular that we see is employee spotlights, and just basically updating information in a way that they can communicate back to the business. So we think it's important to have both the ability to provide a professional editorial experience as well as casual content capability.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I'm just reflecting on the fact that, certainly over the past 5 years, we've seen more and more collaborative communication tools come to the forefront. We have sort of traditional portals and intranets and email we've had for a long time, and chat-based interfaces are there. If you look at the customer experience world, or CX, gets referred to as omni-channel. So when you want to engage across multiple channels and multiple places, how should organizations be thinking about that channel proliferation?
Well, that's a great question, Chris, because it goes back to a little bit what I said earlier about traditional marketing folks, right? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, you want them on your website, but you have to go to where the eyeballs are at, right? And so when you look at the corporate America, people are going to be in their Outlook, they're going to be on Teams, they're going to be on their mobile devices, particularly those deskless workers. And that's one of the things we've seen over the last several years. How do we add the the deskless workers into our digital environment and into the culture. It's not just about an intranet. It's a tool set or communication tool set that allows you to deliver messaging, notifications, and alerts to all those different channels in such a way that even if you'd like to put links in there to bring them back into the intranet as a way of driving traffic back to the site, but maintaining connectivity no matter where they're at.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about where they are. And, absolutely, we've seen more people who either by location or by choice choose to engage on mobile devices. Michelle, have you seen that too? Like, does it matter where people work?
I've observed a couple of things. I mean, we used to call this hybrid and a bunch of other terms, pandemic, pre-pandemic, coming out of the pandemic. A couple of factors I think really changed the dynamic here. One is being able to, have talent join your organization from anywhere in the world certainly changed how we need to think about engaging our employees into our culture, into our content, and into our storytelling as organizations, and then how they just collaborate to get work done. But we're also seeing, because a lot of organizations embrace this, employees working from anywhere, we have a lot more mobile, almost like, I'd call it just nomad, right? Nomad workers. Yep. They might be living in an RV and living their dream and going from national park to national park. And it doesn't really matter where they're working from. We have Starlink now. We have all this amazing technology that employees can connect from anywhere. So we need to meet them on that device, in that experience, wherever they're going to be, so they can be effective. One, to attract and retain the talent, but two, a lot of organizations embrace that flexibility so they could attract the best talent regardless of where they live. So I had coined this phrase coming out of the pandemic is Omni-Work, right? We need to really be thinking about how we build these flexible, dynamic experiences to engage that workforce, and not just omni-channel, but Omni-Work.
So
right?
Omni-Work is a term I haven't seen very much. Could you just explain that a little bit more?
I think it goes a little further than we used to say any device, anywhere, any place. Kind of, that was a phrase, a decade ago, where people, that was an ambition or an aspiration for their digital workplace experiences. And this goes a little bit further than that. I think, it's no longer common to have large enterprise companies or even small startups and disruptors in their industries expecting their employees to be sitting in front of a desk like we are today doing the podcast. But I could be on a hike, take an hour break, take a call. I could be on a riverboat cruise in the middle of Europe and still be getting my work done. So to me, Omni-Work really means it's almost like the culmination of that any device, any place, anywhere really coming into reality now that we have the devices, the technology, and the capability to deliver that. So I think organizations need to kind of rethink that if those experiences don't enable or provide too much friction, you'll either lose the talent, or your talent's going to find a way to work around it in ways that may not be secure or well-governed. I've worked with some customers where they're like, our traveling regional leads that have to go like facility to facility won't use our cloud-based, file storage solution. They're putting stuff on thumb drives and it's not secure. And I go, have you ever really done a ride along and found out why? Most employees want to do the right thing and follow rules and governance and guidelines. But if you're creating experiences that cause too much friction, they will find a way to get their work done and work around those friction points. So I think observation and empathy are super important to understand how to achieve that Omni-Work dream or frictionless digital workplace experience.
So let me ask each of you a question about content and channel strategy. So Ed, obviously there's lots of ways in a fictitious company. Say I'm Marcom lead at Contoso. Yep. And I can put a message out about our new employee give program that shows up in email, and it goes to Teams, and it goes to web pages, and it goes to communities. As long as everyone's reading it, regardless of channel, are all channels equal, or are there better experiences in some channels than others?
So, Chris, I think one of the most important things when it comes to a digital workplace and Marcom teams is understanding your content strategy. That's, you go back to strategy. But And I would also tell you, nothing's more important than the quality of content, because we see a lot of different functionality. Why is someone coming to the internet? The search is great. It's an application front door, to get your other applications. But eventually, if your content is great, people will come to read the content. The problem is if you start sending the same content to everybody, that doesn't mean anything for them. They'll stop reading all your content. So you really have to think about how you're going to look at your content, how you're going to look at your employees, how you're going to segment the employees. This is where the strategy part needs to be worked on. Before people use our tools, they should be thinking about mapping this out. How do we want to target content to different personas, which is a targeting strategy? And then how do we want employees to subscribe to other content? Because you may not know what's interesting them. But the most important thing is making sure that the content that they get is engaging and relevant to them. Because if you send them too much content that's not relevant, they'll stop reading the content that they should be reading.
It's really interesting to hear you bring in some of the tools of traditional marketing about segmenting and targeting into that. And I think it's also important to make sure that you're having a great branded experience across those channels too, right?
Yes, exactly. And a visual brand as well, right? It's not just how I just feel, it's how I visually see the business as well.
Okay. So we're going to move across time, space, and dimension. Michelle, I'm going to ask you to think across time about the content strategy. You're going to have 8 pieces of news that the whole company of Contoso cares about in the course of a month. Are we better off breaking them down into 8 separate communications, or should we consolidate them all into one thing that comes out once a month?
I think if you want people to engage with it and read it, you got to break it down into bite-sized chunks. If we think about just in the consumer space, how things have shifted and what people actually engage with in their daily leisure, personal lives, there's a reason that platforms like TikTok and Instagram and others are popular and have huge followings. If I think about how I engage with LinkedIn, as a professional example, if I see an article posted or I'm writing an article and it's more than a 2-minute, maybe 3-minute read at most, if it's more than that, I'm not going to open it. I'm not going to read it. It's going to be too much of a commitment. So I think smaller is much better. I think the other thing to build on Ed's thing about content quality, I've done entire engagements where just consolidating tonality of the brand matters, and the content you're going to publish to your readers, especially if you're the Mark Holmes group, where you are the professional storytellers of the organization and of the culture. Looking at the tonality, looking at the reading level of the content, making sure that's consistent. Right, Ed, you're supposed to write all your content for that kind of high-end publishing at a certain even grade level of reading so that it's easily consumed by a broad audience. Thinking about things like translation, English as a second language even. When you do these mass integrations or migrations or upgrades in these digital workplaces, often I find that the message and the tone and the level of reading, writing, all over the map too. So if you're thinking about how do I best represent or engage my audience, I think you've got to think also about some consistency, not just the size across history, but tone and size. And
personally, if I do one newsletter a month, knowing that 80% of the organization is reading it, that's not as helpful as if I break it up and find out that 90% of the people are reading the articles about mental health, and only 40% of the people are reading articles about monthly profits. I get more feedback into my content strategy if I break it up that way. Okay, there's a pendulum swing between things becoming integrated and then things getting disintegrated. We've had office suites, and then they came together, and then we had a proliferation of portals, and then we integrated them together. And now when we think about things like AI, there's lots of places where there's a chatbot getting my attention all over the place. So is that just going to be the norm going forward, or should we be thinking about digital workplaces as having a key role at minimizing all of the productivity losses from content switching?
Yeah, I think AI is a sea change, for sure, Chris. I think how we interact with software is going to change over the next several years, and how we interact with machinery. So, how it's going to change, though, I think that's up for grabs. But I think the way you want to approach AI, first, embrace it, because the right AI agent basically means that every employee becomes a manager, right? To have their own little assistant running on that. And the term that Michelle used earlier in her conversation, she used the term frictionless. When you start working, have a conversational experience with the agent on a document, that's such a natural frictionless experience. You naturally want to keep going in that direction. And so when you saw some of these big projects where things were integrated and you had to go here, had to go there, eventually that friction that was there would prevent the adoption to fail. And so once again, using AI, creating a frictionless experience with the information and the communication that you want to have with your employees is going to be what carries the day in the long run.
Can you share some examples? We'll start with you, Michelle, of organizations that do this and do this well.
Sure. One of the things that we often do to find out what is good look like in the field with your employees, you have to go ask, go listen. And common themes, even if you look at the Nielsen-Norman reports of like the last 5 years of award-winning intranets and why were they award-winning, it comes down to being able to contextualize content. Content is king often. Paying attention, doing the hard work on the content, which many organizations skip because it's not sexy, it's not fun, it's not super technical. Combing through your content and making sure that what you're delivering, one, is good and relevant and recent and accurate, but it can also be targeted. Employees want and expect that not just search is good, right? Often I'll hear search, they're like, our search is terrible. Well, if you look underneath the covers, the content is terrible.
Yep.
It's not well governed and it's not targeted. So, being able to deliver trustworthy, solid content. And this is also incredibly relevant in the world of generative AI, because AI is only as smart as what you feed it. And if you're feeding it old, inaccurate content, you're going to have inaccurate results. So content is huge. Integration. So thinking through the steps of like security that is as minimal friction filled as possible to achieve the security goal of the organization is important. In terms of like just integration with applications, access to secure, how you're going to tag and secure content. Like, don't give people 6 metadata tags that they have to go physically go tag content. It won't happen. You'll get the default, whatever the drop-down default is, that's what you'll get. So there is enough intelligence in platforms today to kind of observe and auto tag things best you can. You can run AI against some of that stuff. So securing that stuff, but minimal friction is important. And then just have a good multi-device strategy, right? It's some pretty simple things. And then brand. Make sure the brand is clean and navigation is consistent and obvious.
Yep.
If you can achieve those things, you'll have really happy employees that will actually use what you deliver.
So, Michelle, you mentioned the Nielsen-Norman Awards for great intranets. And Ed, I know that Acumatica clients have won several of those over the past few years. Reflecting on that, by the way, congratulations. Other than the wise choices selecting you all, what do they do well?
So it actually goes back to what Michelle said at the end of the day. Content is king. And what we've seen is people have strong priority for content and quality content and a good content strategy. They're the ones that are being successful. I had one customer who said to me, Ed, when our internet goes down, nobody cares. But today, if this internet goes down, we get calls immediately. And what they said to us was that, every employee now starts their day going onto the internet. It's where they start their day. It's where they look for things. It's where they look to get help. It's where they look to find other people. And it's where they go to read about the company and the company news. And by doing that, we get to drive our internal brand and we increase retention. And for them, that's what good looks like. An intranet that actually matters, an intranet that if it does go down, people actually call and complain.
So this has been a lot for me to consider, and I hope the audience has learned as much as I have. How do you all individually and collectively, what are you doing for customers to help them with this journey?
That's a great statement that it's a journey, right? Because we're a software platform. And for us, when a customer goes live, that's their MVP. We want them to be on a journey, and we want to partner with them, and we want our partners to partner with them to actually take them on that journey. Because a lot of times they can understand what they need to do for that initial launch, but then they don't know what to do beyond that initial launch. What are the other things we can do to create engagement? What are the other things we can do to drive employee satisfaction? And that's where they can use help from just not my team, but from your team, Michelle. And I think that's a missing hole right now that we're looking to get filled for our customers.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that, to build on what Ed said, that we're doing to help customers is, one, sometimes just the scale of ears listening, knowing how to ask the questions to listen to the employees and understand what's most important, and then being able to tie that to a strategic outcome for leadership, and being able to tie like corporate strategy, vision, mission, purpose, brand to something like a digital workplace or intranet. It's hard to do, and often our customers need help doing that, and it helps to be an objective partner in that we can go and objectively listen to employees and to leaders, and then kind of tie that together for them.
Yep.
That's big part of what we do.
As we're getting ready to wrap up, I always love to ask, Ed, I'd love to hear something you've seen or read or heard lately that's really had a personal impact on you that you'd like to share with the Polaris audience.
Yeah, well, when it comes to reading, I'm a bit of a history buff, so I typically read, history books. But the last book I actually read was a book I read 30 years ago, and it was A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawkins. And the reason I read it, though, is because in that story, he talks about Einstein. And one thing Einstein did is he took a natural phenomena that we couldn't imagine, was able to apply mathematics to it, right, and describe space and time. And through that mathematics, he was able to prove how space is curved and the existence of black holes. The reason why that intrigued me, because I go back today and you look at what they're doing in AI, they're mathematically able to represent and model how the neural network in the brain works. And so, and the ability to take data, contents, and images and bring it into arrays as vectors. Once they've done that accurately, this can go pretty far. So I was always intrigued by the fact that they took a natural phenomenon that's really hard for us to imagine, and they were able to represent it mathematically.
Thanks for mentioning that, Ed. Michelle, how about you? Something that you've seen or heard lately that you want to share with our audience?
Mine's going to be, Ed, much less, philosophy and science and all that. Was watching Only Murders in the Building season. And if you haven't watched Only Murders in the Building, and yes, it's the 50th SNL, like SNL 50th. This season 4, Steve Martin is basically like, I feel like we're watching SNL's 50th on stage over an entire season of that show, because what star isn't in that show that's out of his history from his SNL days? If you haven't watched it, highly recommend it. It's highly entertaining. If you're just looking for something fun that's highly star-studded to watch and unwind with, this last season has been interesting.
So just to recap, A Brief History of Time and A Brief History of Steve Martin.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, that said, Ed, Michelle, thank you so much for spending time with the Polaris audience today. Ed, what's the best way for the audience to stay in touch with you?
Yeah, they can. My contact information is on our website at Kumunda.com. You can always find me there, and you'll be able to find my email addresses there as well.
Fantastic. Michelle, how about for you?
Very similar to Ed. You can find me on Sinagers.com's website, LinkedIn. I am third-time podcaster. You can find me on this podcast every couple of months. And then I do try to write thought pieces. This year, my commitment to writing more is something I'm trying to stick to. So I am trying to write a little bit more on LinkedIn and publish those kind of quick, pithy articles around some of the research that I'm constantly doing.
Well, that's great to hear. I'll be sure to pass that along to your head of marketing. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Up next on Polaris Events, the year is heating up with more and more events carrying us forward through spring. Here are some we're watching. On March 11th, following this podcast, Ed and Michelle will present a live webinar to show you how to transform your digital workplace. They'll be sharing new tools and resources to help you drive employee effectiveness. And of course, it's a great place to ask questions live, which is kind of hard to do on a podcast. You can register and learn more at aka.synerger.com/DW2025. From March 31st through April 2nd, the Association for Intelligent Information Management, AIM, will host their annual conference, the AI plus IM Summit, in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm on the board of directors, and I'll be there to share and learn the latest information management and artificial intelligence. You can register at aim.org. May 5th through 8th, the Microsoft 365 Community Conference at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Jeff Teeper and Jairus Pataro will be keynoting from Microsoft, along with other speakers from Microsoft, Synerger, partners, customers, and the community, including me. You can learn more and register at nextgen365events.com. Heading into summer, Synerger will be sponsoring and speaking at TechCon 365 Seattle. This will be at the Seattle Convention Center, June 23rd to 27th. And you can learn more at techcon365.com. We'll have links to all of that and more in the show notes. You can learn more at synerger.com/events, and we'll be adding more events throughout the year. If you have an upcoming event you'd like us to promote on Polaris, please get in touch and we'd be happy to include it. Well, that's going to do it for another episode. I'd like to thank our guests, Ed Rogers from Ecumena and Michelle Caldwell, for joining us and sharing their thoughts on digital workplaces. We encourage you to check out our show page for links to everything we talked about today and more. Visit us at polaris.synerger.com. Send us your questions and feedback for the Synerger team. You can reach us via email at polaris@synerger.com. Remember to rate, review, and tell all your friends about the show. Follow us wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris McNulty, and this has been Polaris, a show that charts the course for business and technology transformation from Synerger. Learn more at synerger.com. See you next time.